Welcome back to the Side Chat Podcast. This week we will be completing our journey through all the different aircraft armament through the countries, ending up with Japan. I'd like to first point out that this will be a little bit different format than the past one because, at least in my judgment, I feel that I should spend the least time on this one due to the fact that most of the Japanese airplanes are not in game. A lot of their weapons and how I put it, weapons and munitions aren't completely in game and labeled correctly. So I'm going to go through the aircraft lines and kind of do a crash course of Japanese aviation and armament and point out some stuff, and I'll try to point out some of the errors and whatnot that need to be corrected with the skill tree. I would like to focus on Japan more in the future because it is actually one of my favorite air forces. I grew up watching military documentaries, war movies, and I've done a lot of reading about this stuff. So I have nothing but respect for the Japanese World War II soldier. So, saying that, I would like to real quickly explain how the Japanese kind of name their aircraft, because it's one of the most confusing things possible. I'll point out some of the stuff that inconsistencies that War Thunder has. Typically, the Navy, which is this first line here, names things like A, which is attacker, or B for bomber over here, or so on. They use kind of the same system the U.S. did for, naming, letter, so on. When it comes to the Army, they typically use this KI system. Little complex, but the Army and the Navy never really agreed on anything. So you're going to see a lot of stuff that's actually named the same, but one's Army, one's Navy. That gets confusing. And typically the armament, bullets, and bombs were not interchangeable between the branches due to the rivalry. So the easiest way for me to kind of go through this is, like I said, I'll go down each Navy tree, the Army tree, and try to point out what's different. So first off, I like to point out that I sometimes call stuff in my recordings and what I post on the channel different than what is in the game. Like you'll hear me say Betty's. Well, that's the G4M1 over here. That's what I grew up knowing it as. That's just the U.S. designation that we taught our guys in World War II because it was actually kind of hard to remember. It was just easier to say, oh, I sold of that plane. That's a Betty, and everybody knew what that was. Versus, that's a G4M1. So, anywho, I'll point out that the KI-43 is called Oscar. That's another famous one. Of course, we all know the A6M by its zero name. That's where that came into play. The KI-49s were called Helen. Sorry. The G5M1 was called Liz. And then the H6K4, or H6Ks in general, these guys were called Mavis. I like that name. And then the B5Ns here were called Mabel. So there's a whole charts and stuff online if you guys want to know more of these. But that's when I call these things by like a first name. That's where it comes from. So, starting out with, I will point out the 7.7 machine gun that is in the naval line. First, it's called the 7.7mm Type 89. If you go to the Army line, the KI-10s and whatnot, you'll see another 7.7mm Type 89. Those aren't the same guns. They're both based off the Vickers E, but they fire a different bullet, and there are some modifications and stuff that go different. So like I said, Army, Navy, same gun, same name, says it's the same bullet. The Navy bullet's slightly shorter. The Army one was based off the 303 British round, but with like a 30-06 cartridge on it is the best way I can describe it. So, the 7.7 I think is underperforming in damage. It seems to do well against things like other biplanes, but when you go up against, these guns are even on the 7.7 Type 89 is even on the A6M3s and the A6M5s where you're seeing B25s, B17s, B24s. It doesn't have enough punching power to go through more sophisticated airplanes. And I don't think that's correctly portrayed. I could be wrong. But I think that damage needs to be definitely updated. And then let's see where we're going to go from there. The Type 99 cannons. This is something that I had a little bit of a hard time tracking down research. Part of the problem with researching Japanese stuff is that they didn't keep very good records. Most of the factories themselves were owned by generals or ex-generals. It was very political over there. And then when they were losing the war, they burned a ton of stuff. So it's very hard to sometimes get information. And I spent about 5 to 6 hours to try to get the best bang for our buck for correct information. If you guys have anything that I say it's wrong or incorrect or whatnot, please provide sources. I actually would like to learn more about this stuff. It's just, like I just mentioned with those Type 89 machine guns, I found 5 sources that had different stories. There's so much misinformation out there about, simply one gun. So stop rolling off of that. Back to the Type 99 Mark 1s. What a Type 99 was basically Oerlikon FF, which is the same thing that, as we know, the MGFF, the Spanos were based off the Oerlikon FF. It was the design that was used throughout World War II. Basically, everybody uses some type of variant of that except the Russians. I'm sure the Russians bought them too because they used everything. So everybody loved the Oerlikon FF design. It's still used today. So Mark 1 is basically the equivalent of a, I guess, kind of lower velocity, lower rate of fire Hispano Mark 1 that we covered last week. You'll see that it still uses a 60 round mag like everybody else did. So that's why we have 120 rounds between two guns. And you will see that the best ammo, I think, is universal. They're all pretty much the same, though. As you can see, they all kind of vary between the HEF, HEFIT, API throughout the tree. So whatever you feel that you have the best success with, I'd say stick with it because you have such few rounds that you really have to make it count to 0. For me, I usually stick with universal or ground target, though. Now, there should be a 99, Type 99, let me move to my notes so I don't misspeak here. Type 99 Mark II, which you will see with the A6 M3s. Only information I can find on the Mark II variant was it was a heavier, better built gun which handled recoil better, but it didn't say anything about larger magazines. Every time there's a War Thunder patch, it really feels like the Japanese ammo counts change because I feel like War Thunder is having a hard time finding these ammunition numbers too, and I didn't want to cite anything because I could not find any information on why these guns were randomly 100 round. I assume they had a 100 round magazine, but I'm not going to, say that with fact. And then you'll see with the A6 and 5s, it's a 99 Mark II with 200 rounds. So, and the AM6 and 5 Otsu goes up to 250. So I don't know how they're getting the larger ammo counts. I assume it's by box mag because, according to my notes, the Type 99-4 was the first one to be belt fed. And then there was a really good version called the Dash 5, but it was too late. They were defeated before the Dash 5 could be put into production and put into service. So you'll see the Type 99s are on the M1Ks and whatnot. So, pretty basic stuff, I think. We're keeping it simple, stupid. We talked about the Type 89 machine gun for the Army, and then you have the HO-103s. I'm going to make this simple, stupid, easy. Whenever you see the basically term HO-103, whether it's 50 cal, the 12.7, the I think it's called on the A6 and 5. I don't know what the heck that is. Usually the HO dash. I'm trying to think what it's called. HO-103, HO-5, and then there's HO-155. Are all based off Brownings. Now, we didn't give the Japanese the Brownings. The Brownings, I believe, got them through the Italians because, as we talked about in the earlier podcast, how the Beretta Safats were given to the Japanese. So the KI-61s, the HO-103s are essentially kind of Beretta Safats. I believe they fire the same round. And that's why you will see the same ammunition belts as the MC202s and G50s that are in game. I'm not going to go into too much detail because some of it will be speculation, and I don't really think it's worth our time. We spent a lot of time talking about guns in depth, so I'm just going to, like I said, review. We've talked about Brownings before. We talked about Beretta Safats. Same type of design. One plane that I would like to point out, though, is the KI-61-L height. A little fun there. Is the best plane, I think, in the Japanese tree. I originally loathed this plane. It pissed me off so much. I flew it 3 times. It turned like a brick. I hated it stock. And then patch came out where it was kind of usable. And hold and behold, it has 20mm MG151s, which we talked about in the German podcast. These things are sweet, and they are killers. I could tell a war story real quick. There's a game that was 4 versus 1. I literally took a head-on with a Russian King Cobra, a Russian D9, another Russian King Cobra, and then caught another Russian King Cobra on the deck. All, without reloading, just one straight attack. These things are lethal. It will reach out above its tier and attack. How did the Japanese get MG151s that late in the war? The Germans gave the Italians 800 of the guns to give to Japan. It was put on an Italian submarine, and they were installed about 300 or so Ki-61s. So, if you hate the Ki-61s, I urge you to give that plane a chance, get some upgrades, and have some fun. The Ki-84s, like I said, kind of use the upper versions of that Browning, and we will move on from the. Oh, let's talk about the Ki-200 real quick. I actually reached out to a War Thunder technical expert, and he was very kind to give me the information because I thought that there was a mislabel here in the game, and there's not. Every source I could find called this plane the JAM. Pull up my notes so I'm not talking on my arse. Hear all those notes rattling around. And there we go. Alright, so you have the Ki-200, which is an Army name, but the Navy called it the JAM. Well, it has a Type 5 cannon, which is a naval 30mm. But I couldn't even find much information about the Type 5 going into service because it was hard to build it. It was late war, blah, blah, blah. Well, he said that it was the first project that the Army and the Navy actually came together out of need to try and build a plane together. There's only 6 prototypes built that never went to production. So their sources says it has a Type 5. My sources said it has the HO-155. I will trust them that they did their research, and but that's why you see a Army designated plane with naval cannons. That's the only plane you should see that on anyway. But I would like to point out though that this is one of the things that kind of irks me about War Thunder. Take a step back before we move on to the bigger guns. You'll see planes called like the Ki-43-LL Hayabusa. The Japanese never used actual names like the Hayabusa for their planes. There were nicknames, but there was never official designations. And if you look at the U.S., the P-40E Kitty Hawk, we never called it the Kitty Hawk. That was a British name for the plane. So there's little inconsistencies throughout the trees, and I believe that Hayabusa name should be removed. It's not game breaking or anything, but it's just little details things I thought I'd point out. So moving on, we have the Ki-10s. Those have the Type 89s we talked about. Ki-45s, I'll go through these real quickly. Most of the Ki-45 cannons were, quite simply put, direct fire infantry rifles that they mounted on aircraft. These things were built very limited. These guns range between like 200 and 330 pounds, very heavy. They didn't carry a lot of ammo. They weren't refined like the M4 cannon the U.S. used, or the Yak-9Ts cannon Russia used, or the Russians cannons they used on the HS-129s. These were just kind of fitted for need, and I think they, for the most part, abandoned these projects. From an endgame standpoint, I think that this is one of the big problems with Japan is these two series of planes right here, the Ki-45 and the Ki-102. I don't think these planes have proper flight models. They sure as hell don't have proper damage models, and I don't think their armament's working quite either correctly. And what I mean by that is when you shoot these big, large calibers, it kind of shoots like an old school shooter how to shoot far left, far right, up, down. Like it has a random inaccuracy to it. If you ever shoot a gun in real life that has that much inaccuracy, something is horribly wrong with the gun. And I went back and I was like, oh, it can't be that bad. My memory is just overreacting. I'll fly this thing in a game and see if it's as bad as I remember. Lo and behold, it is. There's a buffalo about 500 meters in front of me. I'm shooting under, I'm shooting 10 feet over, I'm shooting 30 feet to the left. There's just no consistency with that cannon. The only thing I was able to kill was a PBY because I flew about 5 feet from it and just closed my eyes and, yelled, Jesus, take the wheel, and lo and behold, I hit it in the wing. So why this is a big deal, why I'm kind of making a little rant about it, is that with the strength of the B-25s, with the B-17s, with the B-24s, Japan needs something that can really pack a punch, especially early tier, against the American bombers. And from a gameplay standpoint, these planes need to get cleaned up so that something on Japan can do anti-bomber duty versus just A6M2s hurling themselves at B-25s and hoping for the best. Alright, so kind of covered the big cannons there roughly. Let's talk about bombs. Actually, no, let's not talk about bombs. Let's take a step back to rockets. As in Japan, they call these things air-to-air rocket bombs, from the sources I could find. These were the only ones that went into service. Everything else was experimental. They call these things number 27s. I've seen them called Type 27s. Like I said, a little more naming consistency. I could be wrong. I think these were like Type 27, wait, Type 5, number 27 or something. Anyway, I digress. 5.5 pounds, yeah, let's talk about the fun stuff. 5.5 pounds of incendiary charge shrapnel warhead. What that means is it had a timed fuse that would throw 140 pellets covered in white phosphorus. And for some of you guys who don't know what white phosphorus is, watch some Vietnam movies because the U.S. used that stuff quite extensively in Vietnam. It is some of the nastiest. It is I think the nastiest substance on the planet. If you ask me, what do you think is the worst way to die? White phosphorus. It is horrible. It'll burn through anything. These rockets were put in service February 1945. And that's all the information I could actually find about these suckers. But they do work for killing B-24s and B-17s quite nicely. Bombs. I did a ton of research about bombs for you guys. And I'm just going to quickly go through the Betty's bomb load, point out some inconsistencies, and I would like to some point do a really big piece on game bombing. But for right now, I'm just going to give you guys some guides on how to use Japanese bombs because there's some inconsistencies in the namings and how these bombs work. Typically, Japan had like, when I looked up the charts, there's like 80 or 90 designated bombs. They love bombs. Plethora of bombs, we'll call it. All you can eat buffet of bombs. Typically how bombs are named, there was Navy bombs and Army bombs. So the correct naming platform, what I would like to see more thunder is, you see here, Navy, Type 89, number 25, ground bomb, which means it was used against land installations. That makes sense. It's easy for the player to see that this is a ground bomb, but then you look up and you see number 25, Model 2, GP, SAP bomb. What the hell is that? Well, I had to do a lot of research to find there should be like a Type 98 or 98 or 97 number first, then the number, then the Model 2, and so on. It actually makes a big difference when you research this because it's literally what chapter of the book to go to. You know, it just gives you a, it says like, oh, page 5 of what chapter, if that makes any sense. So they need to kind of go through, I think, and clean this up, and it's hard for me to say, oh yeah, this bomb did this when I'm not even 100% sure which number 25 Model 2 that was. But I did try to find it, and from what I could find, that this was a tear-shaped steel bomb that was used at the Battle of Midway to sink other ships. The Japanese had two bombs, steel teardrop-shaped bombs that could pierce through armor, whether it be steel or concrete, with a time-delayed fuse to blow up inside the ships. So a bomb would hit the deck, usually break through the wooden deck, go into the engine compartment or the lower compartments, and then blow the ship from within. Very, very deadly, but very sophisticated weapon. Then you had the ground bombs that the U.S. used most of the time that would just explode on impact. So, like I said, these, I believe, were used at Battle Midway. They were a Navy bomb, ground bomb. Then we had the 500 kilogram number 50 Model 2. Believe that's an anti-shipping bomb. Like I said, though, without the type number, I'm not going to sit here and, tell you for sure. And then you had the Type 800 kilogram Navy Type 99 type number 80 Mark V AP bomb. That was, I know for sure, an anti-shipping bomb that was used at Pearl Harbor. And that is a bomb that is meant to go through 150 millimeters of armor plate and then explode. So when you want to take down battleships or heavy cruisers, light cruisers, this is the bomb they use. When you want to blow up a crap ton of ground units, this is the other bomb you want to use. Is this what they call the number 80 modification 1. Like I said, with the type number, I can't be 100% sure. Those type numbers are actually kind of a big deal from a historical standpoint. So, catch my breath a second. Hopefully you're still with me. We're going to talk about torpedoes, because torpedoes are awesome, and Japan had the best torpedoes, and they used the best propellants, and they sunk quite a few ships that were, we'll call it trophies. Like, you shoot a big deer and you want to hang it on your wall. With the Japanese blow up some big ships that we know of that, they want to hang on their wall. One of them is, of course, the Arizona, which was blown up by these torpedoes, and the other one was the HMS Prince of Wales, which was a British battleship that sank 3 days after Pearl Harbor. So in game, you will see the Type 91 Mod 2 torpedo and then the Type 91 Mod 3 torpedo. But you see that one's 935 kilograms and that one's 857 kilograms. Well, what's the difference? The smaller one, the Mod 3, they removed some of the explosives and it has a reinforced steel warhead that will basically armor penetration versus the bigger one. So that's your call. If you want to think bigger things, I believe you actually want to use the smaller, air quotes, smaller torpedo, but it's newer. Last thing I'll say about the Mod 2, the bigger one, as is listed in weight, actually has the name of Thunderfish. Thunderfish was what was used and designed for Pearl Harbor. Remember in the first podcast I talked about how we put wood around the propellers because when you drop them in shallow water at low altitudes, you didn't want the torpedo to smack into the bottom of the shallow water and then it would be useless. So the torpedo actually keeps it, when you drop it with this, I believe it runs to about 5 or 6 feet before the torpedo pops back up and goes. And I love simple, easy solutions, and there's nothing cheaper than about 50 cents of wood at the time to fix this problem. So there's a Mod 5 and a Mod 7, but we probably will not see those torpedoes ever in game. If you guys have any questions or advice, as you can see, I've spent quite a bit of time playing Japan. I've actually kind of put Japan on hold until more planes come into the game because I'm not a plane still unlock. I mean, I have the Saber unlocked, but I'm not going to buy it. It's kind of a shame. But anyway, we'll talk about that another day. Alright, so real quickly, I'm going to go on a little news rant before I get off of here. There is a game coming out actually on Tuesday, May 27th, called Watch Dogs. I've been waiting for this game for about a year and a half. You will probably see some of the multiplayer content or me just trolling Kobe Wobi added to the channel. I promise it won't. I'm not going to hit you guys with 5 to 6 Watch Dog videos a day. You know, if I think there's something cool and funny that you guys might enjoy, I'm definitely going to pass it your way. The other game that's coming out on May 29th is the Star Citizen Arena Commander, which, if you're not sure what Star Citizen is or Arena Commander, I have some videos on my playlist on the front channel to kind of give you guys a taste of Star Citizen. It is a space simulation game. Their dogfighting part will hit on May 29th, and you will probably see quite a bit of content over the next year or two on my channel from that. But for the foreseeable future, the podcast and most of the channel's focus will be on War Thunder, so please don't go anywhere. You know, space is fucking cool, right? Okay. We've gotten through all that. So next week, I am actually going to do a podcast on squadrons. I'm going to talk a little bit about TBLF, and I will see if I can hit up a couple other possibly squadrons to see if I can get some of their leaders in here. And I'm honored that you guys asked me quite a bit about, hey, can I join TBLF? Can I join TBLF? Can I join TBLF? And you know, I'm glad to see you guys take an interest, and you know, we think we're cool, and you know, and I wish I could invite all of you in, but you know, from my experience of gaming, and I'll get into that next week, I'm honored that you guys feel like that, and I'll explain kind of why we have such tight restrictions on letting people into TBLF, and I'll also bring in, I believe Jolly Old Chap will be available from BRS to talk about why, you know, just how different squadrons are ran and how, and what we would like to see for the future of squadrons and War Thunder, because I think that's a pretty important tool for the community to come together and for players to get better and so on. So, if that interests you, we will be around next week. Until then, enjoy ground forces and fly safely.